Okay, good afternoon. Very happy to be able to join in the retreats this year. My name is Sudhiro, and today I've been asked to help out a little bit, continue to answer some of your questions. And it looks like there's quite a lot here, so not sure how far I'll be able to get, but it's also possible, at least for myself, I'm just quite new to doing kind of public talks and teachings and things. So certainly, if I run into any difficult questions, I think I might just save them for tomorrow, maybe for Ajahn Kurundam. Okay, so two-part question. Hello, Ajahns. What is the name of the sutta Ajahn Kurundam spoke of this morning regarding sense restraint? Thank you. Salayatana Sutta. And part two, the Buddha consistently advocates for a middle path. How do you interpret this in regards to sense restraint? And what advice can you give us lay practitioners regarding a middle path of sense restraint? Thank you. Yeah, so I think, what Ajahn Kurundam was just mentioning, and talking a little bit this morning about sense restraint, and it's certainly something that the Buddha talks a lot about, and it comes up in many different suttas, and I think it's important, kind of like Ajahn Kurundam was touching on this morning, to note that oftentimes we think of sense restraint as being like really physically restraining the sense faculties, so kind of not looking at things and not listening to things, and kind of trying to shut oneself off from the world. But if you really look at the definition of sense restraint that the Buddha gives, it's not really that kind of physical restraint. It's more of like a restraint of the mind. So like the definition oftentimes is like, seeing a form with the eye, one does not grasp at its signs and features. So it's not that one doesn't look at things or doesn't listen to things, but it's more like when one looks at something, if attraction or aversion arises, what are we doing with the mind? Are we allowing the mind to grasp at its signs and features? Allowing the mind to be shaken and overwhelmed by feelings of like or dislike. So the question asking specifically about the middle way, it's a very good example, a demonstration of the middle way, keeping the mind balanced between the extremes. So the extreme of attraction, liking, going towards the world, and the extreme of not liking, trying to get away from the things that we find unpleasant about the world. So these two extremes are the tendency of all of our minds, and the Buddha's path, the middle way, is really a training of the mind to keep it balanced in the midst of all of our emotions. And I guess, just at the very end, specifically advice for lay practitioners. I think it's, it's very much the same as for monastics. We do have more restraint, like we were saying, externally. As monastics, we give up many more things, and we live more of a physically restrained life. But really, what we're doing internally can be the same, whether we're monks or lay people. Really the internal practice is always the same. So that middle way is something that can be practiced by lay practitioners, just the same as monks, but perhaps it's a little bit more difficult maybe in the world with more distractions and more things going on. So that's maybe the main main difference, between the lay practice and monastic practice is just the amount of distractions and how easy or how difficult it is to practice that middle way. Okay, dear Venerable Sirs, I have been experiencing bright lights of a different range of colors while meditating. I also feel the pressure on my forehead that becomes very intense. Should I ignore this? What is it? Thank you, with metta, Sia. Yeah, so the Buddha and the meditation masters in Thailand, they teach us that there are many different things that can arise in the course of meditation, and I've heard it said by one meditation master that there's no limit to what can be experienced in meditation. So certainly things like visions and all of the sense faculty sounds, and you're also mentioning pressure on the forehead, and difference in perception, the way that we experience the body or that we experience things around us can completely change in many different ways, and it's all very normal in in the practice of meditation. And the Buddha used this word like nimitta, which we often translate as sign, but it's really kind of like internal phenomena. So oftentimes it is described as being like bright lights. Sometimes people will see bright lights in meditation, but many of the meditation masters talk about having all kinds of visions or hearing voices or sounds, and it can also be different tactile sensations that we have, pressures and things like this. Just in terms of what the meditation masters say, all of this is quite normal. It's not anything to be alarmed of. It's just kind of a natural faculty of the mind. In the same way that when we go to sleep at night, we oftentimes have dreams, and we see different worlds, and we experience all kinds of things in our dreams, but it's totally normal experience. So certainly having different experiences and nimittas in meditation is something that the meditation masters say that some people will experience and some people kind of won't really experience it so much. So for ourselves, whether we do experience it or we don't experience it, it's not really something to be too concerned about. Meditation masters always encourage us just to relate to these things with caution, and just not allowing our minds to get swept away by what we're experiencing, and always continuing to have foundation in mindfulness, and keeping the mind with one's meditation object, and continuing to see what emotions arise, what happens to the mind when we experience bright lights or pressures, things like this. The things that arise in meditation. The really important thing is what happens to the mind, and usually the mind responds in the same way that it responds to things in the world. Either with attraction or aversion, oftentimes with excitement or fear. So a lot of times this is kind of the natural reaction of the mind. If we start to have unusual experiences in meditation, then oftentimes we'll either become very excited, or we might become very afraid and quite terrified. And both of those are the defilements of the mind that we're trying to learn how to overcome. So if we allow the mind to get swept away by either of those extremes, then it's going to just tend to lead us to a lot of suffering and lead us down the wrong path. It's very common for people who start to have unusual experiences in meditation, they can become very excited and start to believe that they're like a really special meditator, and it can really feed into our ego, and we can get really swept away by that, and start to become quite conceited. And if we continue to follow that, we can really eventually just go really far off, and start believing all kinds of things, because the meditation masters always caution us that just because something appears in our meditation doesn't mean that it's real. So in the same way that we can have all kinds of dreams at night that are not really real, we can have all kinds of experiences in meditation that can just be the mind, just kind of playing around, and the mind just creating different things. So the meditation masters always caution us not to just kind of take things at face value and get swept away by how things appear to be. And also the other extreme of fear. If we start to have unusual experiences, we might become very afraid, and that can also really take us down a wrong road. Certainly it's very normal for some people to experience these kinds of things in meditation, and there's nothing wrong or really inherently dangerous about it, so there's not really anything to be afraid of. But it is just something that we should always continue to have our mindfulness well grounded in the body, well grounded in what emotions are arising, and always watching how the mind's reacting to those experiences. Okay. For about a year, termites have been poking holes in my drywalls. A clever exterminator tells me that a passive bait trap he could set out would mean it is the termites' choice, not mine. I have asked them to leave, to no avail. Moving is not really an option. Comment. Yeah, so it's actually something that comes up from time to time as well in monasteries, and even here in the West, especially in Thailand, they have so many more insects and rodents and things. It's very common to have buildings just infested with insects, and it's we do always try to refrain from harming other beings. And we really try to exhaust all of the options that we have. In the end, some really extreme situations, it might come down to, the kind of the situation where there's no other option for removing them. Certainly, the exterminator saying that it would be the termites' choice if you put out the bait trap. Of course, that's not really totally true. In terms of karma, if you are putting out traps, there's kind of subtle differences. Like sometimes sometimes we might actually put out some kind of like poison to try to stop ants from entering a particular place. And, you could have the intention, like, I'm putting this out just to deter the ants, hoping that they will come to that poison and then turn around. If you really believe that, and that particular poison is, the kind of thing that the ants wouldn't necessarily cross it, then it can be fine to do something like that if you are really clear that you're not really, intentionally trying to harm the insects. That's always what it comes down to, really, is what our intention is. But if we're in a situation where, like, putting out these traps, if you know that it's going to kill the insects, basically, then that's quite a different situation. Then you are really, making unwholesome karma like that. Whether the termites choose to go into it or not, you are quite involved in in their death. So there's kind of a subtle differences in that. We have to really pay attention to our intentions. And a lot of times in these kinds of situations, we really try to exhaust all of our options and try to think outside of the box. And but yeah, in the end, sometimes there are kind of extreme circumstances. I remember this quite a good story that I heard when I was living in Thailand, when they were building one of the really large meditation halls at Wat Nanachat, and I heard that there was a very, very senior, very well-respected monk, very, very well-respected by everyone, quite a meditation master, who was helping out with the construction. And I guess the first part of the construction process, before they lay the foundation, they have to go around and put this termite poison all over the ground where the foundation will be, because if they don't, then the termites will just completely eat through the foundation. And especially in Thailand, the termites and the ants are just so much worse than here. It's really quite extreme. And so there's this great monk who's just walking around, and he's just casually sprinkling this poison around on the ground. And one of the other monks went up to him and was like, "Oh, Ajahn, do you think about all of the termites that are gonna die, because of what you're doing?" And then the senior monk just smiled and said, think of all the good that's going to come out of this meditation hall. Think of all the merit that's going to come from this place. So it's kind of like it's kind of subtle, because he wasn't like sprinkling it on top of the termites, like in order to kill them. I think that would be something that certainly wouldn't do, if you're really actively doing something that is directly harming another being. But it's kind of like, in that situation, in his mind, he might have thought, maybe the termites won't come through this poison. Maybe they'll be able to kind of tell that it's poisonous and not come through it. But I think that's also really good perspective in kind of extreme cases where we've exhausted all of our options, and can we find some kind of a understanding like that, where it's like, well, I'm not really directly harming them, and I'm really doing my best. Okay, I feel I'm attached to my anger. Why is it so hard to let it go? For example, my kids make me upset because they're being bad. Should I discipline them or let it go? We're certainly all, we're all attached to anger and all of our emotions that we experience, desire and fear. It's totally normal for people to be attached to their emotions. Another way of talking about attachment is just we're affected by our emotions, kind of shaken by them, and so that's totally normal. It's not something to feel bad about. Really, if we become negative about ourselves, because of that, then that's just kind of adding more suffering, more unnecessary suffering, and we're just creating more defilement if we kind of beat ourselves up about it. If we have anger that we're overwhelmed by, a lot of the time we can just look around us and see that certainly everyone has anger, and we're all affected by it to different degrees. Why is it so hard to let it go? It's just because that's how we've been living for so many years, and decades, and perhaps lifetimes. Most of us, we don't come to the practice of meditation until we've lived in the world for 20, 30, or 40 years, or maybe even longer. So that's an incredibly long time probably every day of our life maybe we haven't gotten super angry every day, but probably every day we've experienced minor irritations, we've experienced things that we don't like, and probably many, many times throughout the day, so hundreds of days every year, and over the course of decades, it's just like it's like water flowing down a mountain. As it flows over months and years, it just wears a really deep rut into the ground. And it's very much like our habits. They just become automatic. Anger, being overwhelmed by the anger, and then yelling at people or acting out our angry impulses in some way. That's just becomes totally automatic, and it becomes completely easy to do that, and to not react to our anger or any of our emotions, any of our defilements, becomes something which is extremely difficult, sometimes almost impossibly difficult, just because of the force of habit. It's kind of like if you're trying to change the flow of water, and it's used to flowing a particular way. You have to put forth great effort to change that, the course of that river or something like that. So yeah, that's the reason for the difficulty is just for how long we've been following these habits. If we were practicing mindfulness, as soon as we were born or something, and we were practicing in the correct way, our minds certainly would be very different. If when we were children we were consciously trying to go against anger every moment, certainly it would not be so hard now. But we kind of find ourselves in a place where, having followed our habits for so many years, then trying to change those habits is extremely difficult. And like with your children or with other people in your life, co-workers or other family members, this question whether to discipline somebody or to let it go, that's very much coming back to, we were talking about like the middle way. It's very much something that we have to be learning how to, apply our wisdom to every situation, and it's kind of different, depending on the particular situation, depending on the people that we're with, and depending on, the specifics of that situation. Whether we discipline them or whether we let it go, very much depends on many different factors, and it's something that we have to, it can't just be like an answer like you should always discipline them or you should always let it go. It's much more kind of subtle than that. It's much more something we have to be tuning into. Is very similar to a lot of the great meditation masters. They have young monks who are living with them, and they have to train those monks. And sometimes they have to discipline them, and sometimes they just let things go. And it very much depends on, the particular teacher. Some teachers discipline the students a lot more. Some teachers almost never discipline them, but we have to pay attention to, where is that coming from? Because if the discipline is coming from anger, then it's not going to have a good result. But also, if the letting go is coming from fear, if we just let our children get away with everything, or fear or just aversion or just wanting to, not wanting to deal with them, then our children get into a lot of trouble. But if we're always disciplining them, maybe too much, or we're disciplining them from a place of anger, then it also it has a bad result. They will come to like resent us, and they probably will do the behavior more. So it always comes back to our own mind. It always comes back to, if we have the question, should I discipline them or should I let it go? It really has to do with our own mind. The more we're able to make our mind balanced and at peace, then the more obvious it will become. In that particular situation, it will become obvious whether we should discipline them or whether we should let it go, and also, exactly what we should say. But that's very much dependent on our state of mind, and the more agitated our mind is, then kind of the worse we'll do. The more out of tune our response will be. The Buddha used the simile of like an instrument, like the lute, and learning how to tune the lute so that it's perfectly in tune, so it makes a perfect sound. But if it's out of tune, if it's too tight, or if it's too loose, the strings, they won't make a beautiful sound. So it's like, if our mind is too tight or it's too loose, then we will respond to our kids doing something bad. We'll respond in a way that's it's not quite appropriate, or it doesn't really make the situation any better. Okay. Dear Ajahns, this morning Ajahn Kurnadhammo said that we go towards the pleasant and avoid the unpleasant, and we miss what is in between. My question is, what is in between, and why are we missing it? Thank you. Well, yeah, I guess the first, the second question, why are we missing it, is very much like we were just mentioning, because of the habits, for so long, for so many years, we have always paid attention to liking and disliking. We've always been moved by those emotions, because our habit is to be shaken and overwhelmed by our feelings of liking and disliking. Then that's automatic. It becomes almost impossible for most people to not follow liking and disliking. Especially in the beginning, if people haven't practiced meditation, then it's, in the beginning it's basically impossible for them to really not follow those emotions. It's kind of like a boulder, like rolling down a hill or something, and just trying to stop it. It has an incredible momentum behind it. So, remaining in the middle, it's something that for many people in the beginning is not really possible. It's kind of something that we're working towards. We're trying to learn how to be less and less moved by our emotions, and starting to kind of approach the middle, or approach a place of balance. And that's something that over the course of our practice, then it's something in the beginning that we're it's not like we can just find what is in between liking and disliking in the beginning. It's like we're slowly wearing away our habits and starting to come closer to a place of balance. And certainly the Buddha and the meditation masters, they teach us that, in the middle, there is, incredible happiness, there's incredible bliss and freedom, and it's something that we're trying to find. And it's very much like a journey, traveling to the middle, learning over time how to get closer and closer to that place. If I would like to teach my child preteen about Bap, What is Bap in English, including teaching Dhamma to my child? You told me before about being a good example. What if I would like to teach my preteen child in verbal about Bap? What will you advise? And please give me examples. I would like to teach my child what you will do now in this life about good karma or Bap. It will affect you in the future or next life. What will be the best way to teach my child about this verbally? And teaching about the precepts and rebirth. So the word Bap, I think, is usually translated as like evil or unwholesome, bad. I think that's the usual translation. Kind of the opposite of, good and virtuous. I think, you mentioned teaching by example. I think that's ultimately the best way to teach children, or the best way to teach anyone really. Even senior monks teaching junior monks. I think teaching by example is really the the most effective way of teaching other people. Of course, you do have to still sometimes teach people verbally, and certainly with children, then you do still have to teach them about good and evil and wholesome and unwholesome things. But if it's only just a verbal teaching, and particularly if our own actions don't really match up with that, if our parents tell us to do good, but then they don't really do good, or they didn't do good things in their life, it's pretty difficult for the child really to follow that, or to believe them really. So it does have to be something that we're also really demonstrating to them by our own example. I was thinking, at Abhayagiri we have a children's room, and there's a lot of children's books in that room, and one of the Ajahn Sek, a Thai monk who's living in Abhayagiri, I know he's kind of studying English, so he has been reading these children's books, a very good way to learn basic English. And because it's the monastery, people have donated a lot of like Buddhist themed books, children's books, and sometimes I have been kind of helping him to read the books. And there's really great children's books that have great stories, really teaching about good and evil in really memorable ways, and in very simple ways that children can understand. So that's maybe one way in terms of actually teaching children verbally, is maybe through stories and things like this. So we can give them verbal teachings, and I think particularly like if we're trying to teach them about good and evil, particularly pointing to what the results of evil are, what the results of unwholesomeness are, and maybe not so much we can talk about rebirth and things like that, but I think it's probably more helpful to kind of point to more concrete examples, and even the most immediate effects of evil actions, or what does it do to your mind in that in that moment? What does it do to your mind over time? What are the results in the short and the long term, in terms of the people who want to associate with us, or what kind of reputation we have? Those are things that I think a lot of times are coming up in those children's stories, but it's also something that we could speak with our children about in in kind of a direct way. But I think also, like I was mentioning, the most important thing is really just showing them with our example. And I think it's also very important to say that, with children or family members, a lot of times we do feel a sense of responsibility, and we feel like, I'm imagining, parents probably feel completely responsible for how their child grows up, and what they go on to become, and how they are. I probably feel completely responsible for them. But we do also have to reflect on the fact that we don't have total control over anything in the world, and our children as well. We don't actually have complete control over them, and it is possible that we could raise them in a very good way and give them a lot of good teachings, but they might become a criminal or something. That's totally possible, just because of karmic reasons. So I think that's always something that we have to keep in mind. We have to reflect on that. As parents, or many other examples. As like senior monks trying to train junior monks, or people with family members or co-workers, you kind of do your best, but you also have to know that in the end, you can kind of only do your best, and whether the end result is really what we want it to be or not is kind of out of our control. But if we can look back and at least know that we've done our best, then that's really all that we can really do. Okay. On retreat and in life, I'm often numb, disconnected from my emotions and body. It just feels gray and very unpleasant and empty. Maybe it is from years of repressing painful negative emotions. Not sure how to work with it. Thanks. Yeah, it's very common. I think probably many people in the world, have this same experience, same experience of life. And I think it's important to know that, coming on retreat, it's not really like, our whole emotional experience is just going to completely change just by coming on a retreat. It's very much like coming into this container so that we can see our emotions more clearly. But we do still have to deal with the same kinds of emotions that we experience usually. And you mentioned repressing painful negative emotions throughout your life, and this is also very, very common, very normal. It's how one of the main ways that we deal with suffering in our life is to repress it, to try to push it away, try to distract ourselves from it. And that's something that pretty much everybody does to some extent. So oftentimes, coming on retreat, then when we remove all of the distractions, the ways that we normally avoid our suffering, then oftentimes we have quite intense mental states arising as kind of all of the things that we've pushed away for our whole life. And the first part of meditation is really just learning how to deal with all of the things that we don't really want to deal with. It's learning how to deal with if we feel numb and disconnected, that comes from somewhere. Like you're saying, it's a result of our past actions, as a result of our past mental actions. It's the way that we've related to our emotions for a whole life. So, coming to a retreat, then we're practicing, particularly mindfulness of the body is what is usually encouraged the most in our tradition, and starting to pay attention to if we feel numb or gray, empty, empty in a bad way. Those are all feelings, that we feel in the body. Even something like gray, um, is very much like kind of boredom and depression, and it's all kind of states of, dullness and low energy. So we're using mindfulness of the body to learn how can we be present with all of the things that we have not wanted to be present with in the past. Usually if we feel feelings of gray or numbness, we tend to just distract ourselves with entertainment or something like this. So it's learning, how can we be present with those emotions using mindfulness of the body, using the breathing, using the sensations in the body, the posture of the body, learning how can we attend to the body in a way that we're starting to be less and less overwhelmed by those emotions, like we were talking about before. Starting to try to come more to a place of balance. So usually feeling numb and gray, usually we're just completely overwhelmed by that and pulled down into like a dark, very low energy, depressed kind of state. We're learning how can we use mindfulness of the body to kind of pick the energy up, to prevent the mind from being pulled down. And over time, it's like we're slowly raising the mind. We're slowly learning how to be less and less moved by that, to come to a place of balance. And like we were saying before, the happiness that we're searching for is to be found there in the middle, in the place of balance. Okay, so that's about 2:15. So I'll have to save these other questions for tomorrow, and I apologize. I kind of gave very long answers, and there's quite a lot of other questions, but maybe tomorrow, Ajahn. Thank you.